nice to be here. It is true that I did have a girlfriend my junior year of college who went to Whittier. She was a year older and she graduated, so I did spend about 6 months commuting back and forth between Pasadena and Whittier. Got to know the campus pretty well. And it is also true that I did play basketball at Caltech, and we played Whittier at Whittier every year, and it was fun. We had a good time. There was actually a movie made about the Caltech basketball team called Quantum Hoops, and it's the only movie I've ever been in. And it was one of the quotations from me being interviewed is, well, Caltech basketball was better when I was there than it is now. We were competitive with most everybody, but of course we still didn't win. And although we did actually win my junior year, we actually won more games than we lost. But that was the last year Caltech had a winning season. The 1960-61 basketball season was the last year that Caltech had a winning season. I'm more proud of that record than any of my publications. But so the reason I tell this is in part because it's kind of silly and funny, but it's also that one of the interesting parts of my life, and I think it's yours, is that I always have been an athlete, and all the way back until I was 5 years old. I've always been involved in organized sports. I've always had a deep interest in athletics, and it turns out that not only does that explain why I have written a lot about the economics of sports and studied it, but it also turns out that there are a lot of people who combine that interest. There are several PhD economists who have played Major League sports, a lot. And in particular, I will recount something I was telling others earlier today. Stanford, when it recruits athletes, doesn't exactly compete with USC. We are looking for people who are actually going to be able to pass some courses. And it turns out that because of that requirement, the university uses faculty to recruit athletes, not just coaches. When we are literally the only team in the Pac-10 that uses faculty to recruit football and basketball and baseball players, as opposed to just letting the coaches do it. And we actually have a role in the sense that the coaches say, does this guy have the slightest chance of getting through the freshman year? And because it's an intense academic environment. So to tell the good story that I hope motivates those of you in the audience who are interested in athletics, about 10 years ago, I was recruiting a football quarterback, and I said to him, so what are your career plans? And he said, well, what I hope is that I can, after I play at Stanford, I'll be good enough to play for a few years in the NFL, and then when I'll make enough money that I will then be able to afford to go back to graduate school, get a PhD in economics, and become an economics professor. And I said, wow, that's cool. Why would you want to follow that career path? And he said, quote unquote, that way I can spend the rest of my life being paid to do what I would do anyway. And that's exactly what an athlete is about and what a professor is about. We're people who get paid to do what we would do anyway. And now, we don't like to tell the administrators of universities that. but passion and love for what you're doing is a necessary ingredient to success in something that requires as much dedication and discipline as being either a world-class athlete or a world-class professor. And Kim Thomas was a world-class student and a world-class professor, and she had that dedication. I saw it when she was 20 years old. And so it's really a great honor for me to have this role reversal take place, where I'm the Kim Thomas lecturer. That is so cool. I love it. So let's talk a little bit about public stadiums. These are constantly in the news. in the four major professional sports in the United States. Soccer is not yet a major professional sport. The Major League Soccer in the United States is second or third tier league. It's sort of somewhere between the second and third level of professional soccer in England or France or Germany or Italy or Spain. So it's really not, we should think of it as AA baseball. In the other four sports, 80% of the teams have had a new stadium built for them with a public subsidy in the last 20 years. Of those, many are now dissatisfied with the facility that was open for them. The ones whose facilities opened circa the early 1990s are dissatisfied. They want a new one. The history of professional sports stadiums has gone through several cycles in that initially they were completely privately owned. The first publicly owned stadium for a major league professional sports team wasn't built until the 1930s. That is to say, until the 1930s, they were all owned by the team. Public subsidization of stadiums really didn't get going heavily, although the first one occurred in the 30s, until the construction of the New Orleans Superdome, which was a huge expenditure and was touted as a way to attract all kinds of new tourist business to New Orleans. Now, how many people have ever been to New Orleans? All right. Did you go there to see the Superdome? Anybody? Why do you go to New Orleans?
Food.
Food.
Mardi Gras.
Jazz. Mardi Gras. Right? These are the kinds of tourist events that pack in lots and lots of people and that are like a business. That is to say, if you're in a business that is related to tourism, you derive enormous benefit to your business by having New Orleans be one of the great tourist attractions in the United States. It's one of the top cities for tourism. It ranks right up there among the top cities for attracting tourists. But the intriguing point was that whereas New Orleans did not have to pay hundreds of millions of dollars to subsidize the existence of the French Quarter or similar amounts for Mardi Gras, it was willing to lay out a huge amount of money to construct a professional football home stadium. So what we want to ask ourselves, first of all, where I think you know the answer already, is from a strictly financial standpoint, is there any conceivable way you can spin a large public subsidy for a professional sports team as a good investment for the community on a strictly financial returns basis? All right, and then of course the answer to that is no, but we need to, I have to explain that and why that's true and give some examples and illustrations. And then the second part of the story is, okay, given that the answer is no, why does it happen? We have a democratic society. If the standard result is you lose money, why is it the case that democratically elected city and county governments nonetheless produce subsidies for stadiums? That's the political question. And that's a more difficult question. All right, I mean, we have an illustration of it just recently in Santa Clara. And let me just go through the basic numbers. The 49ers do not want to play in Candlestick Park any longer. If any of you have ever been to Candlestick Park, you wonder why they played there this long. It is a decrepit facility. It has a terrible location. It's hard in California to find a swamp, but they found one. And they built a stadium in it, and if you happen to go to a 49ers game on a rainy day, you come back and your car wheels are in 8 inches of mud. Because it really is a swamp. And the stadium itself is falling apart. There was not too long ago, a section of the stadium had to be taped off because a piece of cement fell and almost killed somebody from the red body of the stadium itself. If you actually go look at it, it looks like you've just been to a European city in the middle of World War II that's just been firebombed. It just looks awful. And it's looked that way for a long time because it's a very old stadium. It was built circa 1960 to house the San Francisco Giants. So it's now 50 years old. The expected useful life of the stadium is 30 to 35 years. So it's long past its sell-by date. And it's not surprising that 49ers and their fans would say enough is enough. We really need to have something better than this. Okay, so they are shopping themselves around for a new place to locate. The city of San Francisco is willing to put in a little bit of the money. They recall the San Francisco Giants, a few years back, actually tried to move to Florida before the expansion that gave us Tampa Bay. They actually signed an agreement to move to Tampa, but the owners in Major League Baseball did not give the Giants permission to move, and years and years of political negotiations later, they managed to get what is now called AT&T Park, which is located in downtown San Francisco. It's a very nice baseball stadium, but the thing that's really most important about that facility is that 4 times a new park for the San Francisco Giants with a public subsidy was put on the ballot. And 4 times it was defeated. And there's a wonderful quote from the mayor of Tempe, Arizona, about a stadium that was built for the in Tempe. It says, well, when a team comes to us and says we want a new stadium, we always put it to the voters. If the voters say yes, we build it. If the voters say no, we build it anyway. And that's what happened in San Francisco. Voters said no, but they built it anyway. But the important fact, of course, was that the amount of direct subsidy was minimal. What the city did is they gave them the land, which was probably worth about $45 million, and they built the infrastructure to support it, the surrounding roads and sewer connections and water connections. But the actual stadium itself was not paid for by the city. This was a landmark. When AT&T Park opened, it was the first baseball facility that had been opened in 20 years that did not have a direct financial subsidy from the city. That tells you something about San Francisco and about the problem the 49ers face, is that they couldn't really expect to get much more from the city of San Francisco other than the site where Candlestick Park now is. And maybe some help with the cost of tearing down the old stadium. And some infrastructure support. But they couldn't hope to get hundreds of millions of dollars in subsidies. So the 49ers went to Santa Clara, and they noticed that the redevelopment authority had a bunch of unspent cash, and the city-owned electric and water utility, had a bunch of unspent cash. And those two together added up to $125 million. So they said to the city of Santa Clara, you give us the land and the $125 million, and we'll find some way to finance the rest of it. City of Santa Clara said, great, what a wonderful idea. And that was what was on the ballot last June. But what was on the ballot last June was a slightly misleading story, because what it actually was a ballot initiative to do was set up a city-owned stadium authority. The city-owned stadium authority's board of directors would be the city council, but it was a separate corporate entity, thereby insulating the city itself from financial liability of the stadium authority. The stadium authority, in return, was responsible not just for the $125 million plus the land, but it also was responsible for selling personal seat licenses. That is to say, when you open a new stadium, they ask you to pay somewhere between $1,500 and $10,000 up front for the right to buy a season ticket. That's called a personal seat license. They also were responsible for selling the naming rights, which is, you no longer call a stadium, you know, in my day, stadiums were Dodger Stadium. And they were named after the team. Now they're named after companies, Qualcomm or AT&T or whatever. And the city was responsible for selling the name, some corporation. The city was also responsible for selling something called pouring rights. You may wonder why it costs you $8 to get a Coke at a sporting event, or $15 to get a hot dog or something like that. Well, the reason is that the right to be the exclusive monopoly supplier of ingredients to the concessions is sold. So when you go to a stadium, you're never offered Coke or Pepsi. Get to choose. No, you never get to choose. You're offered one of them because a cola company, a beer company, a hot dog company, whatever, will pay for the exclusive right to be the supplier of that ingredient to that stadium. And of course, what that does is create a little local monopoly. There's no competition for the concessions. That produces really high prices. And that's what causes companies to be able to pay for what are called, they call it pouring rights, but it's really more than that. It's the right to be the exclusive monopoly supplier of ingredients to concession stands at these facilities. And when you add up all this, the Stadium Authority was committed to $350 million of additional funds beyond the $125 million plus land that the city was already supplying. The city would own the stadium, but of course, the Stadium Authority, as a city-owned corporate entity, if it went bankrupt and couldn't pay that money, then of course, the stadium and the facility would be auctioned off in bankruptcy. And the city would lose complete control of the facility. And so that's part of the story. And then another part is we're now up to 350 plus 125, and the total cost of the stadium was estimated to be around 900 million, plus or minus 25 million. Of that remaining amount, the agreement stipulated that the 49ers would be responsible only for about 100 million of it. The rest of it was going to come from the NFL. The NFL has had a fund for the last few years where it actually has paid part of the cost of all the new stadiums that have been built for NFL teams for the past 15 years or so. It's not a big part, but it's a serious part, $250 million per stadium. That fund is now depleted. There's no money in it. The NFL is deeply in debt for the stadiums it's already built, has a high debt overhang. The NFL also is in the last year of its current collective bargaining agreement. That is to say, there is no agreement in place with the players' union to play next year. The players' union is 100% convinced there will not be a season because the owners will lock them out. In that kind of an environment, coupled with the current recession, what's the chance that the NFL is going to come up with $200 or $250 million as its component for the financing of the stadium? But here, notice a little of the politic point here. We have a stadium proposal that has what is said in the proposition to cost the city $125 million. But where the total cost of the stadium is $900 million, the team has only agreed to put up $100 million, and the rest is sort of airy-fairy and up for grabs. What will happen? Well, all that what will happen part is in the future. Meanwhile, construction is supposed to start next summer. How do you start construction? You borrow money. And what will happen will be the city will borrow the money, lend it to the Stadium Authority. The Stadium Authority will sign a contract to start to build the stadium. and hope that it sells the naming right, pouring right, seat licenses, that the NFL kicks in its money sometime in the future. Because if it doesn't, the city will be sitting on $700 million worth of debt that it has no way to pay back. Santa Clara is a very small town. Now, this is not the first time this has happened. Some of you can recall, way back in the dark ages, 1994, 1995, there used to be a team called the LA Raiders. The LA Raiders were lured back to Oakland by almost exactly the same deal. All right, the deal that the Raiders agreed to was, once again, the city would renovate the Oakland Coliseum and would be responsible for selling all these exact same things. There was no NFL subsidy involved, but all the other stuff was on the table. They sell PSLs, naming rights, pouring rights, and the city passed a resolution allowing the indebtedness to renovate the stadium, but with the expectation that the ultimate cost of the city would be about $50 million, and all the rest would come from these other sources. They even agreed to be the ticketing agent for the Oakland Raiders. They guaranteed the Raiders sellouts for every game and assumed the responsibility of selling all the tickets. Now, I happen to be pretty liberal politically, but I'm not one who thinks that a city government is really good at selling football tickets. And to me, it seemed to me incredulous at the time that the city would take on a marketing assignment to sell 65,000 tickets per game for football. But they did. Well, when all the bad stuff happened, the revenues didn't materialize, the city had this enormous debt, the city basically went bankrupt. It didn't actually file for bankruptcy, but it lost a tremendous amount of money, had to cut back on public services, and it was a complete financial catastrophe. All right, that's exactly the same deal in Santa Clara. Almost certainly, if this thing actually is built, if they actually do issue the bond and start construction, exactly the same thing will happen to Santa Clara as happened to Oakland. And indeed has happened to lots of other cities. Now, why does this happen? Why is this the way it goes? And this is both an economics question and a political question. Let's deal with the economics question first. Contemporary rules are, you build a up-to-date, modern football facility. It's going to cost you somewhere between $800 million and $1.2 billion. All right. Now, just to apply a little cash flow analysis, what would the owner of a stadium, suppose a stadium costs $1 billion, and it has, as I described earlier, a useful life of about 30 years. What would the owner of that stadium have to get back in cash per year to make that investment worthwhile? Well, let's do straight line depreciation, right? Let's do $1 billion if it's going to last for 30 years. That's $30+ million a year of depreciation. You have to get back that. In addition to that, you have to receive a return on investment that justifies the investment. And the pre-tax return on investment in competitive industries that has to be earned to justify investment. What do you have to be able to promise stockholders and bondholders to be able to invest in your company? And a not bad number is on the order of 10%, 9 to 10%. So you've sunk $1 billion into this thing. We'll have to divide it by 2 because you're going to have depreciation. So on average over the 30-year period, you'll have $500 million invested in it. 10% of that is $50 million a year. So you've got to have a cash flow after paying all the costs of the football team of $80 million a year. How much revenue does a football team actually take in from selling tickets and from the profits of concessions? Okay, well, I'll tell you the answer to that. First of all, it's very variable. Prices to NFL games, on the average price for attending an NFL game varies from about $65 at the low end to about $100 at the high end. So there's a big variation. But let's just assume it's 100 at the top. And you play 10 times a year, 2 preseason games plus 8 regular season games. You draw 65,000 per game, that's 650,000 times $100 per person in ticket price plus concession profits. $65 million. Oops. The entire revenue from the stadium isn't enough to cover the capital cost of the stadium. Can't possibly be done. Lesson number 1. Contrary to its importance in society in general, contrary to the fact that most males are known to spend something like 25% of their time talking about sports, so despite the social importance of sports in American society, Major League professional teams, and football teams are the most successful of all professional sports. So when we use that example, we're talking about the cream. They're tiny businesses. The outlet of Macy's in the Stanford Shopping Center takes in 3 times as much money per year as the most successful NFL team. It employs roughly 25 times as many people as the average number of employees of an NFL team. So a Macy's store is much more valuable to a community in terms of tax revenues, employment, whatever. And a Macy's store doesn't cost $900 million. A Macy's store costs about $30 million. So if you're the mayor of the city, you're going to say 49ers, $900 million. 30 branches of Macy's, $900 million. Duh. All right, now that's not all the story, because you might say, well, yes, but think of all these people who come to the city for no reason other than football, who are here, and once they're here, they spend all this money in the city. Look at all that tax revenue we're going to get from them staying in hotels, going to restaurants, buying gasoline. And think of all the free advertising we get when on national television the Santa Clara facility is being shown as the home of the San Francisco Giants. Okay, well that's a possibility, right? You have to take it seriously, and so let's analyze that. Is it the case that professional sports teams are meccas for tourism? Well, interestingly enough, the city of Baltimore actually did that study when it was constructing the new facilities for the football and baseball teams in Baltimore. And they did a survey of people in attendance at football and baseball games in Baltimore. Where did you come? Where do you live? How long did you spend in the city? What did you spend while you were here, other than the money you spent inside the stadium? And lo and behold, they discovered that 85% of the population, those in attendance at the baseball and football games, lived in Baltimore. Even among those who traveled from another town, the vast majority of those simply drove to the game and drove home. They didn't spend anything. They might have stopped at a gas station. They didn't spend anything in the city. And there's a reason for that. We can get back to why do teams want these facilities to begin with. And the reason they want these facilities to begin with is because they want to encapsulate everything you might buy in connection with going to a football or a baseball game inside the stadium. The most rapidly growing component of revenues of professional sports teams is things other than selling tickets and broadcasting rights. It's merchandise, concessions, That's growing at about 15% per year, even during a recession. There's a wonderful picture on the internet that you can get to illustrate this point. There's an aerial photograph that was published in the Chicago Tribune just before new White Sox Park was open and old White Sox Park, or Comiskey Park, was closed. Now, the two parks have almost identically the same seating capacity. All right? One is 44,500, the other is 45,000. So they're essentially identical in terms of how many fans can be there. But in the aerial photograph, you can see the footprint of the new stadium is 5 times as big as the footprint of the old stadium. So why do you have 5 times as large a facility to seat exactly the same number of people? Well, part of it is the obesity epidemic. The seats are larger. They're not a lot larger, but they are larger. Part of it is lots more luxury boxes, where you take up more square feet per person than you do elsewhere. But the main reason is concession space. When I was a kid and you went to the baseball game, you know, your parents could get a hot dog or a hamburger and a beer, and you could get a hot dog, a hamburger, and a Coke. Now you can buy quiche and white wine. You can buy teriyaki, Thai food. You go to a typical modern sports facility, and it's like going to Restaurant Row. And indeed, in San Francisco, there's actually a concession stand for Wolfgang Puck. All right, so rich lawyers and CEOs who attend baseball games in San Francisco don't have to give up their dinner at a 5-star restaurant where they can lay out $50 or $100 for their baseball food. That's what sports is now about. That's why the teams want these new facilities. They want them to generate this additional concession revenues. To give you a taste of this, going way back, the first time I gathered data on the financials of professional sports teams, the rule of thumb in professional sports was that the profits on concessions were worth roughly $2 per person in attendance. Okay? Now they're worth $20 to $25 per person in attendance. Just the profits. We're not talking the price, we're talking the profits. And that's why they want new stadiums. That is the main source of revenue growth. Now that still isn't good enough to justify almost $1 billion for a stadium. That isn't enough revenue to justify it. But that explains why a team wants you to give them a new stadium that's 5 times as big as the old one. Because that's the way they sell more concessions. Okay, so that explains why. We know that the stadiums are not there for the purpose of drawing tourists. Another argument that is sometimes given, I'll just briefly mention, is that there was an argument made in the 90s that in order to be a corporate headquarters city, you had to have a major league professional sports franchise, because no CEO or board of directors of a corporation is going to vote to hold board meetings or live in a city in which they can't go to a major league baseball game. Now that, of course, was a magic research question for intrepid economists, and it took about 6 months to disprove that one. Any CEO who said, well, my company can be worth $10 billion if I locate it in Wichita, Kansas, and $1 billion if I locate it in Kansas City, I'm going to Kansas City because I like to go to baseball games. That CEO wouldn't last very long. Right? So it was easy to debunk that, to show that indeed presence of major league sports teams has no effect at all on corporate location decisions or anything else. So we can debunk the notion there's anything about building a stadium other than the desire of teams to expand their ability to earn non-ticket revenue. And that's what you buy for your $900 million for a football team, your $600 million for a baseball team, or your $400 million for a basketball or hockey team. You buy the right for that team to earn more money on concessions. And that's all you get. All right, and there's Andy Zimbalist and I put together a book on this topic that was published about 10 years ago called Sports, Jobs, and Taxes, in which we analyzed all teams in all sports, including minor league baseball, including spring training in baseball. And lo and behold, the answer is pretty much the same, with one exception. A city can actually break even on a facility that is shared by an NBA team and an NHL team. That is to say, if you think about it, that means there's lots of events in that facility. And in addition to that, it has some use other than just for playing sports. When I was your age, big rock groups would play in football stadiums. All right, the Rolling Stones and the Beatles and people like that could sell 75,000 tickets. No popular musician today can sell that many tickets. This is extremely rare. The number of events per year in the Oakland Coliseum plus AT&T Park plus Candlestick Park in the Bay Area, the total number of musical events in those facilities per year now, for the last 5 years, has been less than 3. That is less than 1 per stadium. And that's because the nature of popular entertainment has changed because of the internet. People don't go to these huge concerts anymore. So there really is no use for a football stadium or a baseball stadium other than playing football and baseball games. And that isn't good enough to generate the revenues to justify the stadium. At least a basketball, hockey combined facility can also be used for conventions and can be used for concerts where you want to draw 10,000 or 15,000 people instead of 75,000. So you can actually break even on building a joint use facility and having other events. But for baseball and football, as it was put by the former mayor of New Orleans after he experienced the joy of paying for the Superdome, the way you build a football stadium is you go out and you dig a great big deep hole. And it's true, that's how you do it. And he said, that's where you put the stadium, and that's where the stadium puts you. All right, so that's the bottom line. Politics. So why do we do it? Now, this is a complicated issue because it's very hard for someone who's an economist thinking about voting behavior to say, if everybody is facing a strong probability of having to dole out $100 per capita per year for the next 30 years to pay off a stadium, they wouldn't vote for it. So we have to find another reason, right? That is to say, despite all this talk about the investment value of a sports facility, there has to be something else going on. What's going on? Well, I will now recount to you insight number 1, provided to me by a friend who is a professional bridge player of some renown and makes a lot of money doing it. And he lives in Santa Clara, and he voted for the stadium. Why? Because I'm a Niners fan, and I'm tired of driving an hour to get to Candlestick Park. I want him here. It's going to cost you, in discounted present value terms, $10,000 as just your share. I don't care. It's worth it. Right? It's not about the investment aspect of it, to him. It's about being a fan. So let's unpack that. How many people are actually NFL fans who that's how they're going to think? Well, it turns out we have another survey we can do. How many people in the Bay Area actually ever attend a 49ers game? What fraction of the population? What fraction of the population actually report that they normally attempt to watch games on television if they're not in attendance? What is the typical audience rating? How many people will respond to a survey questionnaire that yes, they are sincerely and interestedly dedicated 49ers fans? Well, it turns out when you ask those kinds of questions, the biggest positive feedback you get is for football. Football is the most popular sport. And depending on how you ask the question, you'll get that somewhere between 25 and 30% of the population, 50% of the males and 10% of the females, or something like that, will actually express they're not only fans, but they're real fans. So that gets you the first core support. It doesn't get you a majority in an election. All right? It doesn't get you the majority. Well, then how else can you get the majority? Well, the second way you get the majority is all the people who are going to make money in the short run from building the stadium. So construction unions, the banks that are going to lead the financing, they're all in favor of it. Now that's not very much. That's only a few percentage points more. But it's important in another regard because it pays for the campaign finance, for the bond issue, or for the ballot measure that empowers the local government to build the facility. So they're the ones who pay for the election. They plus the team pay for the election. The people who are against it aren't really well organized. They're ordinary people who are saying, yeah, my taxes will be, either my taxes will be $50 higher or $100 higher per year, or my public services will be declined a little bit. But they're not really organized, so the opposition has no money. In the case of the Santa Clara ballot measure, the proponents of the ballot measure had $8 million to spend on campaign finance in a city of 100,000. All right, that is to say, $80 per person to spend on campaigning. $80 per capita, that includes all the children. The opponents had $10,000. All right, so there's huge disparity in campaign finance. Now, why do we actually hear the economic argument about why these are good deals? It's because of the campaign finance and advertising aspect of it. A lot of people out there who are not really sports fans, who don't really know very much, and they only get one side of the argument. So they say, well, if it's going to break even, and my neighbor is a 49er fan and he really wants it, that's okay. It's not going to cost me anything. I might as well vote yes. And that's what happens. Now we can add one more element to it, which is the position of the sports teams. If we had competition for location of teams, if every team were free to locate everywhere it wanted, multiple teams would want to be in all the major population areas. They'd be crawling all over themselves to be in Los Angeles, which has 0 NFL teams. But certainly half of the league would rather be in Los Angeles than where it's currently located. There'd be many more teams in the larger cities, New York, Chicago, LA, San Francisco. Like soccer in England. In a normal year, the Premier League has between 6 and 8 teams from London. How does it work? They have promotion and relegation. The highest minor league sends its top 3 teams per year into the Premier League. The bottom 3 teams are relegated to the highest minor league. As time progresses, a larger and larger fraction of the teams are in the biggest cities. Manchester, London, Birmingham, Liverpool end up with most of the teams. That's the way it would be in the US, except for territorial rights. Teams have monopolies on the location of their team. Santa Clara can't go out and say, let's have a competitive bidding among 10 NFL teams to see who wants the least subsidy to play football in the Bay Area. No. They have exactly, well, they could in fact negotiate with either the Raiders or the 49ers, but in most cities you only have one to negotiate with. You don't have multiple teams to negotiate with. In that kind of a world, the bargaining power is on the part of the team. They can offer you an all or nothing bargain. Not the stadium in which the marginal benefits exactly equal the marginal cost, the most efficient stadium. But as one of Kim and Tom's classmates at Caltech put it, Rod Fort, who's a professor at the University of Michigan now, he said, the proposal they make is the Taj Mahal. All right? Because your choice is Taj Mahal or nothing. In other words, it's not that you're really having a competitive process. You either have to give them what they want, or they'll go to another city that'll give them what they want. So that's the last reason. We have monopoly sports leagues. Monopolists extract money. That's their job. So that explains the politics. It's unbalanced because of the campaign contributions and organization of interests, and you're dealing with monopoly. So your choice is all or nothing. So now you know. The economics of stadiums, yuck. Politics of stadium, politics as usual.